The Prince of Lodebar, A Chronicle of Brokenness and Grace. Chapter 1. The Golden Cage. It was a morning carved from light. In the royal palace of Gibeah, the sun did not merely shine. It seemed to pay tribute, cascading through high, arched windows to bathe the stone floors in pools of liquid gold. Dust motes danced in the shafts of light, suspended like tiny stars in a galaxy of privilege. The air smelled of cedarwood, pressed olives, and the faint, metallic tang of polished bronze. Servants moved with the practiced invisibility of those who serve power, silent, efficient, their heads bowed. Guards stood like statues at every threshold, their spears catching the light, their eyes trained on the horizon. To the casual observer, the house of Saul was a fortress of unassailable strength. It was the seat of the first king of Israel, a monument to a new era of sovereignty. But even the thickest stone walls cannot keep out the cold draft of destiny. In the center of the great hall, oblivious to the political currents swirling around him, a 5-year-old boy was engaged in a battle of epic proportions. His enemy was a shadow cast by a pillar, his weapon, a discarded piece of olive wood he wielded like a broadsword. He lunged, parried, and struck, his laughter echoing off the high ceilings like bells. "Take that, you Philistine giant!" he shouted, his voice high and clear. "Mephibosheth," a gentle voice chided. His nurse, a woman with kind eyes and hands roughened by work, hurried after him. "My little prince, you must be careful. If the king sees you running like a wild goat." Mephibosheth stopped and grinned, breathless. "Grandfather loves to see me run. He says I have the legs of a gazelle." The nurse smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. She adjusted his tunic, smoothing the fine linen. "Your grandfather has much on his mind today, child. The armies are gathering. Your father is with him." At the mention of his father, the boy's face lit up. Jonathan, the name was spoken in Israel with a reverence usually reserved for patriarchs. Jonathan was the crown prince, the warrior who had climbed cliffs to root garrisons, the man whose heart was as vast as the wilderness. But to Mephibosheth, he was simply the man who tossed him into the air and caught him every time. "Father will win," Mephibosheth stated with absolute conviction. "He always wins, and his friend David will help him." The nurse stiffened. The name David was a complicated one in the halls of Gibeah. To Jonathan, he was a soul brother, bound by a covenant of blood and love that transcended politics. To King Saul, he was a usurper, a shadow lurking at the edge of the throne, a man whose rising star threatened to eclipse the house of Benjamin. "Hush, child," the nurse whispered, glancing around. "We do not speak that name too loudly here." Mephibosheth didn't understand the tension. He only knew that his father loved David, and that was enough for him. He resumed his play, running toward the heavy oak doors that led to the inner courtyard. He was fast, agile, his body a testament to the strength of his lineage. He was royalty, he was the future. He did not know that the future was about to end. Chapter 2. The Day the World Broke. The change in the atmosphere was subtle at first. Like the drop in pressure before a storm, the servants moved faster. The guards gripped their spears tighter. The usual hum of palace life was replaced by a taut, vibrating silence. Outside, beyond the safety of the walls, the battle of Mount Gilboa was raging. It was not going well. The Philistines, the ancient enemies of Israel, had swarmed the mountain like locusts. They had chariots of iron and hearts of stone. Saul's army was tired, morale was low, and the Spirit of the Lord had long since departed from the king. Inside the palace, Mephibosheth was eating a fig, swinging his legs from a high stool. He watched a dust cloud rising on the horizon through the window. "Is that father coming back?" he asked. The nurse was standing by the window, her knuckles white as she gripped the sill. She didn't answer. Then came the sound. It wasn't the triumphant blast of a shofar. It was the sound of chaos. The heavy gates of the city were thrown open, not with ceremony, but with desperation, a messenger stumbled into the courtyard. He was a vision of ruin, his tunic torn, his face a mask of mud and dried blood. He fell to his knees, gasping for air, his chest heaving. "Speak!" The captain of the guard barked, rushing to him. The messenger looked up, his eyes wide with the horror of what he had seen. His voice was a rasp, a croak of doom. "Dead," he wheezed. "They are all dead." "Who?" the captain demanded, shaking him. "The king," the messenger sobbed. "Saul is fallen, and his sons, Abinadab, Malchishua, and Jonathan, they are slain on the high places." The scream that tore through the palace came from the nurse. She turned from the window, her face drained of blood. "Jonathan, dead, the king dead." The implications hit her like a physical blow. In the brutal logic of the ancient world, a change of dynasty meant a purge. If Saul was dead, the Philistines would come to burn the city. Or worse, David's men might come to secure the throne by eliminating any potential rivals. Mephibosheth was a rival, he was the heir, he was a target. "We must go," she whispered, panic seizing her throat. "Now, we must leave." She rushed to the boy. Mephibosheth looked at her, confused, the half-eaten fig falling from his hand. "What's wrong? Where is Papa?" "We are going on a trip, my prince," she stammered, grabbing him. She didn't wait for him to stand. She scooped him up into her arms. He was 5 years old, heavy for his age, solid and strong. "I want to walk," he protested. "No time," she cried, running for the door. She burst into the corridor. The palace was in pandemonium. Servants were looting silver goblets. Guards were shedding their uniforms to blend into the populace. No one paid attention to the woman running with the child. She ran down the stone hallway, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Her arms burned with the weight of the boy. Mephibosheth was bouncing against her shoulder, scared now, sensing the terror radiating from her. "Hold on, child, hold on," she gasped. She reached the stairs leading to the lower courtyard. She was moving too fast. Her sandal caught on an uneven flagstone. For a moment, she was suspended in the air, a tableau of desperate intent. Then gravity took over. She fell forward. Instinctively, she tried to twist her body to protect the child, but the momentum was too great. Her grip loosened. Mephibosheth was launched from her arms. He hit the stone floor with a sickening crunch. He didn't scream immediately. The shock silenced him. He lay crumpled at the bottom of the stairs, his legs bent at impossible angles. The nurse scrambled to him, ignoring her own bruised knees. "Mephibosheth, get up, we must run." He looked at her, his eyes wide and vacant. He tried to move his legs. They didn't respond. He tried to push himself up. His lower body was dead weight. Then the pain hit him. It was a white-hot lance of agony that shattered his world. He opened his mouth and let out a wail that pierced the chaos of the palace. The nurse sobbed, scooping him up again, though his legs dangled uselessly now. She didn't stop to check the damage. She couldn't. Survival was the only imperative. She ran out of the palace, into the dusty streets, carrying the broken prince away from his inheritance, away from his father's memory, and into the wilderness. On that day, two things died: the king of Israel and the boy who used to run. Chapter 3. The Land of Nothing. They ran until the towers of Gibeah disappeared behind the hills. They ran until the sun set and the jackals began to howl. They crossed the Jordan River, moving east, away from the centers of power, away from the eyes of David. They found refuge in a place called Lodebar. The name itself was a curse in Hebrew. Lodebar meant no pasture or no word. It was a wasteland, a place of barren rocks and scrub brush, where the wind whistled through dry ravines. It was a place for people who wanted to be forgotten. A man named Machir, son of Omil, took them in. He was a wealthy man, loyal to the house of Saul, but he lived in the shadows. His house became Mephibosheth's prison and his sanctuary. Years bled into one another, the boy grew, but his legs did not heal. They remained withered, thin sticks that could not bear his weight. He dragged himself across the dirt floors of Machir's house, callousing his knees and his hands. He learned the language of silence. He learned that he was a liability. He was the grandson of a dead king, a claimant to a throne that was now occupied by the great King David. To be known was to be in danger. Stay inside, Mephibosheth, the nurse would whisper. If they see you, they will kill you. So he hid. He hid in the back rooms. He hid in his own mind. He constructed a fortress of shame around his heart. He looked at his broken body and saw a reflection of his broken lineage. I am nothing, he told himself as he watched the other children running in the dust outside the window. I am a dead dog. I am a mistake. He heard stories of Jerusalem. Travelers would pass through Lodebar, speaking of the glories of King David. They spoke of a city of gold, of a king who wrote songs to God, of an army that was undefeated. Every story about David felt like a knife in Mephibosheth's heart. David was the reason his grandfather was dead. David was the reason his father was gone. David was the reason he was hiding in this hole in the earth. He imagined David as a monster, a ruthless tyrant who hunted down the remnants of Saul's house to secure his power. Fear became Mephibosheth's constant companion. Every knock at the door made his heart hammer against his ribs. Every stranger was an assassin. He grew into a man. But inside, he remained the terrified 5-year-old boy at the bottom of the stairs. He married. He had a young son named Micah, but the shadow of his identity never lifted. He was the prince of nothing, ruling over a kingdom of dust and regret. Chapter 4. The King's Memory. Jerusalem was a world away, bathing in the light of a golden age. King David sat on his throne of cedar, looking out over a city that was finally at peace. The Philistines were subdued, the borders were secure. The Ark of the Covenant rested in a tent on Mount Zion, but peace has a way of unearthing buried things. One evening, David sat on his balcony, listening to the sounds of the city below. The harp lay idle in his lap. His mind drifted back, past the wars, past the caves of Adullam, past the years of running from Saul. It settled on a face, Jonathan. He remembered the day they met, after he had killed Goliath. He remembered the covenant they had made in the field, swearing eternal friendship. He remembered Jonathan's voice, trembling with prophecy. You shall be king over Israel, and I shall be next to you. He remembered the oath. Do not cut off your kindness from my house forever. No, not when the Lord has cut off every one of the enemies of David from the face of the earth. A pang of grief, sharp and fresh, struck David's chest. Jonathan was gone, the promise remained. The next morning, the throne room was buzzing with the usual business of state. Generals, scribes, and petitioners filled the hall. David raised his hand, silencing them. Is there still anyone who is left of the house of Saul? David asked, his voice echoing in the silence. That I may show him kindness for Jonathan's sake. The question hung in the air, heavy and strange. Usually, kings asked about the survivors of the previous dynasty to execute them, not to show them kindness. The courtiers exchanged nervous glances. Finally, a steward stepped forward. His name was Gibeah. He had been a servant in Saul's house, a man who had managed to survive the transition of power by making himself useful. There is a man, Gibeah said, bowing low. Gibeah, tell me, David commanded. There is still a son of Jonathan, Gibeah said, his voice measured. He is lame in his feet. David didn't ask how he became lame. He didn't ask if he was a warrior. He didn't ask if he was a threat. Where is he? He is in the house of Machir the son of Ammiel, Gibeah replied, a hint of disdain in his voice. In Lodebar, Lodebar, the land of nothing. Send for him, David ordered. Bring him to me. Chapter 5, The Summoning. The sound of hoofbeats in Lodebar was rare. The sound of a royal chariot was unheard of. When the dust cloud appeared on the horizon, panic swept through the village. Mephibosheth was sitting in the courtyard of Machir's house, whittling a piece of wood for his son. When he heard the commotion, he looked up. Soldiers, they wore the colors of Judah. They bore the crest of the lion. His stomach dropped. The day he had dreaded for 20 years had finally arrived. They had found him. Machir came running out, his face pale. "They are asking for you, Mephibosheth." "It is the end," Mephibosheth whispered. He looked down at his useless legs. He couldn't run. He couldn't fight. He was trapped. Two soldiers entered the courtyard. They were tall, imposing men with swords at their hips. They looked at the crippled man on the ground. They didn't draw their weapons. "Mephibosheth, son of Jonathan," one asked. "I am he," he replied, his voice barely a whisper. "King David commands your presence in Jerusalem." It was a sentence of death wrapped in formal protocol. Mephibosheth nodded slowly. He kissed his son Micah on the forehead. He didn't say goodbye. He couldn't bear it. They lifted him onto a donkey. The journey was a blur of terror. Every mile that brought him closer to Jerusalem felt like a step toward the grave. He remembered the stories of his grandfather Saul throwing spears at David. He remembered the blood feud. Why would David let the grandson of his enemy live? He spent the journey rehearsing his final words. He would not beg. He would accept his fate with whatever dignity he could muster. He was the son of Jonathan. After all, chapter 6, the table of grace. The gates of Jerusalem were massive, imposing. The city was loud, vibrant, alive, a stark contrast to the silence of Lodebar. The palace was a labyrinth of stone and cedar. Mephibosheth was carried through the corridors. He felt small, he felt broken. His clothes were dusty from the wasteland. His hands were rough. He did not belong here. They brought him to the great hall. At the far end sat the king. David looked older than the stories described, but his eyes were sharp. He watched as the soldiers set Mephibosheth down. The crippled man immediately collapsed onto his face, prostrating himself on the cold stone floor. It was the posture of a conquered enemy, of a worm before a lion. "Mephibosheth," David said. The voice was not angry. It was not cold. It trembled with an emotion Mephibosheth couldn't identify. "Here is your servant," Mephibosheth replied into the floor, waiting for the order to the executioner. "Do not fear," David said. The words washed over Mephibosheth like cool water. "Do not fear. I will surely show you kindness for Jonathan your father's sake," David continued. "I will restore to you all the land of Saul your grandfather, and you shall eat bread at my table always." Mephibosheth's headspun land. Restoration, eating at the king's table. This wasn't execution. This was exaltation. He raised his head slowly, looking at the king. He saw tears in David's eyes. He didn't see a tyrant. He saw a man looking at him with the love of a father. "What is your servant?" Mephibosheth choked out, the bitterness of years rising in his throat. "That you should look upon such a dead dog as I." It was a confession of his self-image. Dead dog, useless, unclean, unwanted. David stood up and walked down the steps of the throne. He didn't look at Mephibosheth's withered legs. He looked at his face, the face that held the eyes of Jonathan. "You are not a dog," David said softly. "You are a son." David turned to Gibeah, who was standing in the shadows. "I have given to your master's son all that belonged to Saul and to all his house. You therefore, and your sons and your servants, shall work the land for him, and you shall bring in the harvest, that your master's son may have food to eat. But Mephibosheth your master's son shall eat bread at my table always." It was a decree of total restoration. In one moment, Mephibosheth went from a pauper in Lodebar to a landowner in Israel. But the greatest gift was not the land, it was the invitation. That evening, the royal table was set. It was a table of champions. Joab, the general of the army, was there. Absalom, the beautiful prince, was there. Solomon, the wise child, was there. Tamar, the lovely princess, was there, and Mephibosheth was there. He was carried in and placed in a seat of honor. As he pulled his chair up to the table, the heavy tablecloth draped over his lap. Under the table, his feet were twisted and broken. Under the table, the evidence of his fall remained. But above the table, he was indistinguishable from the rest of the royal family. Above the table, he feasted on the king's wine and the king's bread. He looked around the table, he saw acceptance, he saw belonging. David raised his goblet. To Jonathan, he whispered. Mephibosheth raised his cup. For the first time in 20 years, the shame lifted. He was not defined by his fall. He was not defined by Lodebar. He was defined by the covenant. Epilogue, the mirror of the soul. The story of Mephibosheth is not merely a historical footnote. It is the biography of the human soul. We are all Mephibosheth. We were born into a royal lineage, created in the image of God, destined for glory. But a fall occurred not of our own making, but a fall nonetheless. The fall of Adam in the garden shattered humanity. We were dropped. We became spiritually crippled, unable to walk with God in the cool of the day. We fled to Lodebar. We hid in the wasteland of sin and shame, terrified of the king. We believed the lie that God was hunting us to destroy us. We saw ourselves as dead dogs, unworthy of love, unworthy of attention. We built our lives on the dust of no word, but the king was searching. He did not search because we were worthy, he searched because of a covenant. Not a covenant made with us, but a covenant made with another, the Son, Jesus Christ. Just as David loved Mephibosheth for the sake of Jonathan, God loves us for the sake of Jesus. He sent his messengers, the Holy Spirit, the church, to find us in our Lodebar. He brought us to the palace. We came trembling, expecting judgment. We came expecting to pay for our sins. Instead, we heard the words, "Do not fear." He restored what was lost. He gave us an inheritance we did not earn. And he invited us to the table. When we sit at the communion table, when we partake of the bread and the wine, we are Mephibosheth. Under the table, we still bear the scars of our fall. We still struggle. We still have weakness. But above the table, we are clothed in the righteousness of Christ. We are treated as sons and daughters. We feast with the King. The grace of God does not depend on our ability to walk. It depends on his ability to carry us. We are no longer defined by the fall. We are defined by the invitation. We are the crippled princes, eating at the King's table forever.